Impact is really thrilled this morning to welcome you all here to United Nations headquarters for this discussion of what's been accomplished and what can still be accomplished when universities around the world join together in order to realize the goals and mandates of member states of the United Nations, of the peoples representing the peoples of the world in achieving such things as human rights, sustainability, and conflict resolution. We're particularly thrilled because the focus of United Nations Academic Impact is to serve as an initiative bringing together universities from around the world precisely to do this in your own creative ways, in ways that can exceed our own imagination and that can move us into the future in a constructive way. We're very happy to be co-hosting this event with De Montfort University, a relatively recent member of the United Nations Academic Impact fold. We also would like to give a shout out to some of the other member institutions that are here: Guilford College, the University of Pennsylvania, Elon University of Law, Fordham University, Rutgers University, all UNAI members, as well student representatives from the University of Bridgeport and City University of New York. But our tent is large. We also are very glad to have institutions looking in on the webcast. Please consider how your institution can contribute to these worthy goals as well. We're looking forward to today's deliberations, which are both retrospective in the sense of seeing what has been accomplished since the January meeting that got the Join Together Network off the ground, and that we'll be looking ahead to actions that will be taking place in your communities around the world on your initiative to realize human rights for all, sustainable development, and conflict resolution, among many other necessities that we face in this world. With that, I'm very happy to turn over to Professor Dana Brown of DMU for the remainder of the morning. Thank you again all for coming.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. My name is Professor Dana Brown. I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor and Dean of Business and Law at De Montfort University, and I'm excited and honored to be hosting the event today here at the United Nations. So thank you all for joining us for what is the second momentous event at the United Nations. It's going to be an important and exciting day, a vital part of which is your contribution of your thoughts and ideas to the discussion we have here today. The format will be as follows. Shortly, we'll hear from our chair and members of our distinguished panel, which will be followed by 3 sessions. In the first session, we'll consider the work of the network since we first came together here in the United Nations in January. In the second session, we'll hear how universities and their staff and students can use diplomacy to rise to the new global challenges. And finally, in the last session, we'll review how we will continue to move forward as a joint network by implementing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. As I've said, your engagement in today's event is essential to its success. Please raise your hands and ask questions whenever the opportunity arises, and vote during the voting sessions. For many of us who are here today, this might be our only time inside the United Nations, so please seize the moment. This is an exciting opportunity for all of us. The way it's going to work today is that the chair of the session will attempt to select as many contributions from the floor as possible during the sessions. Please don't press the microphone button unless you have been selected by the chair, but if you have been selected, please do press the button as appropriate. Please do what you can to get involved in social media, to share what we are doing here today. It's very important and a very monumental occasion for us. You'll see the hashtag on the screen behind us. Please use this hashtag, Join Together, and use a variety of channels in social media: Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter. We're also live streaming this event, and we'll be taking questions on social media from you here in the audience, but also from people viewing live in the UK and around the world. The event today will conclude at 2:20 p.m. with a group photo outside. There'll be no formal breaks during the session between now and 2:20. Should you need to leave the room for any reason, please do so as quietly as possible. The restrooms are located out the doors to my left and to your right. And we do ask that you don't eat or drink on the floor here. So with those details behind us, it is my great pleasure to introduce the Chancellor of De Montfort University, Baroness Doreen Lawrence, who will say a few words.
Good morning, everyone. As the Chancellor of De Montfort University, I'd like to welcome everyone here today to today's summit, particularly those partner at university that's joined us today for the first time. It was characteristic of the first event in January that students contributed so much to the success, and I'm keen to hear what has been achieved since the last convened here in the conference room 4, where strong commitments were made by partner university to improve the lives of refugee migrant communities by promoting safety, dignity, and respect throughout their work. Collectively, universities are ideally placed to raise the challenge of integrating refugees locally around the world. In DMU home city of Leicester, some simple but hugely valuable achievements have brought people together to create a common understanding, making a significant and lasting impact on people's lives. Stories that I'm sure that we will hear more about today. To see other universities pledging to provide similar support to refugee and migrant communities at their time of need is truly inspiring. This summit represents another chance to come together to create a roadmap for continued progress towards a more inclusive world. We are all here to enrich further and campaign with fresh ideas around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and take the inspiration from each other. I believe that it is vital that the voices of young people are heard in these debates, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what emerges from today's sessions. Thank you.
To introduce the Vice Chancellor of De Montfort University, Professor Dominique Chellard.
Thank you, Dana, and good morning, everybody. Because I'll be chairing all 3 sessions, I'm going to keep my remarks quite succinct at this point, but there's 3 things that I'd like to say to you all as delegates today. First, please remember the words of Gandhi Ji when he said that you must be the change that you want to see in the world. And what he meant by that is that you can make an individual difference to improving the environment around you and to improving the conditions of our planet. And that mantra that he uttered many decades ago is never more relevant than today. Thank goodness we have an organization like the United Nations. And I'm deeply grateful to colleagues such as Maher, who's going to be speaking next, for giving us this opportunity to debate some of the most pressing issues that are facing our planet, but more importantly, to advocate some solutions to those challenges. The second thing that I'd like to say is that I want you to enjoy every minute of these 3 sessions. This is a remarkable opportunity for us to articulate some of our ideas and to put them into action and to draw them to attention as some of the most senior diplomats on this planet. And the third thing is that by the end of the day, I hope you have a pretty detailed understanding of the implications of the Sustainable Development Goals. We'll be talking a lot about those. In a sense, these are a manifesto to save the planet that are going to be operable from 2015 to 2030, and they're going to become a prism through which we view at our university all our activities, be it teaching, research, student support, or extracurricular engagement. So I'd like you to have a wonderful time. I shall do my best to create an environment whereby you feel confident to speak. You'll have an opportunity to vote, and I just hope you have a really thrilling engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. We're very grateful that our next speaker has been able to find time in an extremely busy schedule to address our event today. Please welcome Maher Nasser, the Director of the Outreach Division in the United Nations Department of Public Information.
Thank you, Dana. And good morning, and welcome to the United Nations. How many of you are here for the first time? Okay, don't make it your last. The United Nations, of course, was created as an organization of member states, and we do recognize that states and governments are the ones who give us the mandates. They give us the resources to do what we are doing around the world. At the same time, we also go by the words of the Charter of the United Nations, which starts with "we the peoples." So it is your organization. In 2015, in September, a historic landmark set of goals, some people call them Sustainable Development Goals, this is the official name that we have to call them by. Civil society organizations have given them the name Global Goals, and you see them behind you. And looking at those goals, it's an agenda for what we need to do together. When we say Join Together was an initiative last year, 2 years ago, to promote respect, safety, and dignity, mainly focused on migrants and refugees. But it is also related and is part of the global agenda for 2030. If you look at the global goals, most people will associate them with fighting poverty, eliminating hunger, ensuring access to health, education, gender equality, protecting the environment, saving the oceans, life over land, dealing with climate change, one of the most existential threats that we have. Reducing inequalities is important. Working to improve our urban environments and societies. Working for access to energy and sustainable energy, clean energy, renewable energy. At the same time, we have two goals that are not very well known. Goal number 12, which talks about responsible production and consumption, which is something that is having impact on life on the planet as we know it, and goal number 16, which promotes peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provides access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. So within goal 16, we can think of Join Together, together universities, together civil society, together private sector, together governments, together individuals. We need to work together to achieve the ambitions of the global goals. Within that, to ensure that nobody is left behind. Nobody is left behind because they are marginalized in a society. Nobody is left behind because they are a minority. Nobody is left behind because they are migrants or refugees. When we look at the work we do at the United Nations, of course, member states and governments come here and they have lived up to the responsibility by adopting those goals. At the same time, we know that governments face different and political priorities that change. Governments do change, but eventually, and I don't refer to the Sustainable Development Goals as United Nations goals. They are actually all of our goals. They are your goals. They were adopted by world leaders as an agenda for change, as an agenda that we need to change the way we consume. We need to change the way we select our politicians and hold them accountable to these goals. Because regulation and governments do make a difference. And we have examples. When we look at the world today, some people will say we have the highest number of displacement ever since the Second World War, 67 million people displaced. 23 million of them are refugees, and the rest are displaced within their own countries. We have conflicts that have been ongoing for 6, 7 years and longer, much longer than that. We have anxieties rising because of new technologies and concerns about AI and cybersecurity and the infiltration of digital and social media into every aspect of our life, the loss of privacy, what is happening to data. At the same time, the world is spending last year, $1.73 trillion were spent on military. That's 2.2 of the GDP of the planet. So is it the right priorities that we have, that we are spending 2.2% of the world on GDP, while we spend less than 10% of that on official development assistance or on humanitarian aid, which has skyrocketed? 10 years ago or 12 years ago, the universal humanitarian appeal that is coordinated by the United Nations was in the range of $4 to $5 billion. The one that was launched this year was $24 billion. That's the amount of humanitarian assistance aid needed by different UN organizations and civil society organizations. At the same time, I don't want to give you a grim picture. We are also living at a time when we have the lowest percentage of people living in extreme poverty ever. We have achieved major advancement in ensuring and providing education. Gender equality remains a big challenge, but there have been progress in many parts of the world, including at the United Nations. For the first time, in the most senior leadership in the organization, at the level of Assistant Secretary General, Under Secretary General, there is parity. And to some extent, that has never happened before. So we're trying to lead also by example. For the first time also, there's been an equal number of women and men submitted as the UN resident coordinators by the Secretary General. These are the leaders of the UN in the field, in the developing countries. Hunger. 800 million people are still hungry and they are food insecure, but that is probably the lowest number it has ever been. Life expectancy is the highest it has ever been. So there are major achievements. However, the challenges are huge, and I think the responsibility is upon all of us, individuals, universities, societies, and it's really heartening to see universities coming together, joining together with the United Nations, with young people like yourselves who are the future, because there is much at stake in this agenda for you than for us. It is about you having the same level and standards of life as your parents have, and usually up till now, every generation enjoyed a better standard of living than their parents or their grandparents. The challenge is that this is the first generation that can end poverty. It's also the last generation that can deal with climate change. And climate change is, at the moment, not on track. Let me put it this way. We are not on track to meet the targets of the Paris Agreement of December 2015. And that means that we have to double our efforts. And looking around at what is happening in the world, you also get glimpses of hope, because climate action is proving that renewable energy is becoming cheaper, and many more societies and communities and governments are moving in that direction. Plastic waste. 2 days ago was the World Environment Day, 5 June. I don't know if you were aware of it, but the United Nations Environment Program launched a campaign, #BeatPlasticPollution, asking every person to take 3 steps to reduce their plastic waste. And I was happy to see the water that we had here was in cartons and not in plastic bottles. The plastic straws, plastic that we see in supermarkets. And you see initiatives taking hold, and I think consumers have the ability and responsibility to hold businesses accountable. I think I saw a statistic at some point that when 5p was introduced as the price of a plastic bag in supermarkets in the UK, usage of plastic bags and the appearance of plastic bags on the shores went down by 85%. Rwanda, as a country, banned plastic bags from the entire territory already a few years ago. So it is doable, I think, but we have to look at what is happening in the oceans. Tomorrow, 8 June, is World Ocean Day. We have many days, by the way, and we use these as an opportunity to reaffirm commitment to certain aspects of what is on the agenda. Every day could be the SDG day, but I think it's important. We all have a birthday, so it's like you all have one birthday, so the ocean has one day, environment has one day, but I think we have to think about how can we take that one-day commitment to more than just for that day itself. Many of you have and come here to share experiences, and I think this is actually what this meeting is about you sharing those experiences and those initiatives, because it's up to every one of us to know what we can do. I'm not in a position to tell you what you need to do. You know what you can do, you know what your responsibility is. And as we do this for the environment, let's not forget also the most vulnerable amongst us. And those could be migrants, could be refugees, could be a minority, could be people displaced because of conflict within their own country, could be different from us, ethnically, religiously, sexual orientation, or whichever way they are different. But at the bottom, we're all the same. So compassion is at the heart of societies, of democratic societies, and I think we have to think of how do we translate that to change the world for everybody at every level, no matter where they come from, what they do for a living, and ensure that the basic principle of the Sustainable Development Goals agenda is leave no one behind. So let's not leave anyone behind. And I think every one of you here, this room usually takes about 800 people. I think maybe you are 700 people here. So that's 700 people capable of making a change. The change starts with you, the society around you, universities, but also don't forget that it's important to remind also the government representatives that they have a responsibility to also continue working to achieve what they themselves committed to doing by 2030. Thank you for being here, and I hope that this is not, for those of you who are here for the first time, don't let this be your last visit to the United Nations. Come again. And if you have chance, when you're outside, take a look at some of the exhibits outside. Last week, or the week before last, was World Peacekeepers Day. I mean, I'll just give you a hint of, we talk about the UN. The UN is not just this building. The UN is not just the meetings and governments coming together to adopt resolutions, agreeing on norms and regulations. The UN is also more than 50,000 people working in the field, 110,000 peacekeepers, and if you have a chance to look at the virtual reality short film that puts you in the shoes of a peacekeeper in Central African Republic, in the DRC, or in Mali. You had a chance, you try that and see the men and women of the United Nations, of member states who are sent to the United Nations, serving to protect the weak and to preserve peace, going to places where nobody is willing to go and nobody else is accepted as a neutral, impartial peacekeeper. In the last 70 years, which is the number of years we have had peacekeeping, 1 million men and women served in peacekeeping in 71 peacekeeping missions. There are now 14, and 3,700, more than 3,700 of them were killed in the line of duty. Killed by insurgents, killed by warring parties, killed by unexploded ordnances, kidnapped and killed, and yet you will find that member states are sending their men and women to protect the peace. So if you have a chance, have a look at the exhibit outside and bear in mind that the UN is more than just a meeting place. The UN is also working to preserve the peace, to build the peace, to mediate, to create the peace, to fight hunger, to fight, to protect refugees, to protect children, and to protect the environment. Join that fight. You don't have to be a member of the UN itself, a staff member. You can do it through your civil society, you can do it through your government, but come back to the United Nations and tell us more what we need to do and what we can do, because also we want to hear from you. Thank you for being here.
For inspiring words. I'd now like to welcome some of our De Montfort University students, Connell Pugh, a first-year student who's studying law, and Lucia Metzger, a second-year student of international relations and politics. Both of these students have been working in Leicester on our Join Together campaign, and they're joined here today by Edafi Okporo, a former refugee from Nigeria who was granted asylum in 2017. Edafi serves as the director of the RGD Refugee Shelter, a transgender-friendly shelter in Harlem. In Nigeria, Edafi was the victim of mob violence due to his award-winning work advocating for human rights and LGBTQ access to healthcare services. Edafi received asylum in the United States and continues his work fighting for human rights. This week, I'm delighted to say that Edafi was able to join some of our students in the work that they've been undertaking in New York on behalf of refugees. Connell and Lucia are going to talk a little bit about that with Edafi to give us some insight into what they've been doing. Connell?
Thank you. As a part of the Join Together campaign this week, myself and other members of DMU Square Mile travelled to Harlem to St Mary's Church. Whilst there, we helped out with some gardening, and the gardens there are used to grow food for all those that are in need, so whether if they're homeless or refugees. And whilst at St Mary's, I had the privilege of meeting Edafi, who is the director of the RDJ Refugee Centre.
Whilst at St Mary's, Edafi spoke to us and he explained his journey and how he got to the United States. Edafi has a book called Bed 26, which I advise everyone to read, and it explains his story in much more detail. Edafi's story really touched me because it explains how his travel from West Africa and the trials that happen in West Africa and how they approach LGBT, and it's not really nice because West Africa is not really open-minded towards stuff like that. And Edafi's story really touched me because being from a West African heritage, I could relate to him much more.
I welcome you all to the UN. If we have to discuss about refugee stories or issues about migrants and refugees, I believe it's an unending issue that needs a lot of attention. I remember when NASA was talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, the refugee and migrant issue is at the center of it. Because if 67 million people are displaced, it tells you how far-reaching the issues that contribute to what causes this displacement: gender equality, war, violence. We're looking for peace, and all these issues that come together into play for refugees and migrants. And there's a lot of misconception about the refugees and how things lead subsequently to people being displaced from their country to finding a new home. I'm going to be giving you guys a little insight about how you can contribute to this and many more work, but I just want to tell you a little bit about the difference between a refugee and a migrant. We all know that a migrant is someone who is moving from one place to another, but there's a lot of misconception about a refugee because the 1951 Refugee Convention document that was signed covers only a portion of what human rights was as regard to religious persecution in Europe back then. But today, human rights persecution is countless and limitless, and the definition no longer covers what it is to be just from nationality, skin color, membership of a particular social group, religion. There are people who are running from environmental disaster, droughts, and poverty. And I believe that this has contributed to what it is to be a refugee right now, that a refugee is someone who is displaced from his country and is in another country seeking refuge. But today, people are displaced in their own countries, and they need attention and care to be given to those people, because if we don't attend to those people as a subset of the refugees and displaced persons, it leads to a further prejudice towards them when they move into the borders of other countries seeking refuge. That is what that prejudice has led to countries who have powers to give support to these persons has extended their prejudice, because these people walk to the border seeking protection that they are supposed to be protected as a basic human right. When someone is running from danger from his home country and you sign a document that warrants you to protect that person, when the person walks to your border, it is your duty to protect that person. But I believe there are some people who have conservative views towards this, because they believe that these people who are coming are unskilled or do not deserve to increase their population so that they can be able to take care of their environment and their economy can be preserved. But I will tell you, the development we see today in every country is as a result of diversity and contribution from people of different background and different skills, because diversity and inclusion leads to a greater scale of views compared to people in a little circle that sees something. Everybody, if all of us are from the same place, we will view a particular issue in the same way. But when people from different places come together to look at a particular issue, it brings a larger understanding and in-depth into what it is to live the life in UK as compared to United States. The refugee policies in UK is different from the US because we are all different. But when people come in with different views, it gives us a perception that we would never imagine. So when we are thinking, we should try and think inclusively of people from different backgrounds, because when we add people from different backgrounds into the issue, it brings an in-depth insight into the conversation. I will stop here because I have other things I want to discuss with you guys, with Lucia and Pog. So let me stop here for now so I don't take your time too much.
I'd like to ask you, Adafe, as someone who has been a refugee, what is your message for all the universities here today and what they can do to help?
It's pretty simple. With all the information out there that is available to university students, there is little research that has been done about the refugees' behavior. If I would advise as academians that have opportunity to participate in creating change, one of the first things that we do is we look into scholarly peer review articles. I would encourage students to do more research into what leads to people fleeing persecutions from their country. My intern that is working with me all throughout the summer, she's doing a dissertation on transfer of money, for how refugees transfer money. And she was looking for research materials, and she could barely find research materials about how money is being transferred when refugees migrate into a new country. For us to create more awareness, one thing we can do is to research into psychological and mental behaviors of people who come into a new countries. From there, we could find a solution. Because when you are able to gather data that will help you to propagate the issues on ground, it will help us to know what way we could use to solve the problem. One of them. Secondly, young people. We have ample of information on our fingerprint that a lot of people do not know about, like the SDG, for example. There are people in West Africa, or there are some people in Europe. If you tell them about SDG, they don't know what SDG is all about. And you are here today, you have social media, you have Instagram, Twitter, you post nude pictures and whatsoever you do there. You want to create change. The best way to do it, I believe, is by creating awareness and propagating the information which is not available to others and they are available to you, is one of the best ways we could use to act as agent of change. Thirdly, When you see a Muslim girl wearing a hijab in your school, or when you see someone with a different accent that have gone to school in a different country and migrated to your country because of war or disaster and have a different level of assimilation from you, what you can do is to accept that person and make the person feel loved, for that person to see the humanity in you, for that person to be able to integrate into a new society and be productive in that society. Because when people have gone through this refugee experience, they usually have post-traumatic stress. And these pockets of trauma leads to their inefficiency to assimilate as well as other students in that class. And when we are able to propagate acceptance as students in that university, our culture of accepting people will propagate into the outer world, and that person will confidently go back home and say, Mom, Dad, when I went to school, people accepted me for who I am, and for that reason, it gives me that enablement to want to thrive in that environment, even if I don't want to. So, like, it might seem little, but it goes a long way. Fourthly, volunteer for a non-profit, IRC, IAS, community-based organization. We need your skills. Because the funds, like non-profits, always ask for funds, and there's misconception about what do you guys do with the fund. But if you can volunteer for a non-profit for 3 months in the summer when you are on holiday, you also have a volunteer experience, you have work experience, and you will contribute to propagating safety and good work for people who are really, really in need. There's a lot of things you could do, but I'll just leave it with those 4 for now.
Well, many thanks to all of our speakers. Thank you so much. We're now going to take a group photograph before we move into the 3 sessions. So if I could ask everyone on the panel to please step forward in front of the podium. Everyone else remain seated.
Everyone stand, please.
ready to start our next session, our first session? Thank you, everyone. So our first session is entitled Universities Join Together, Network Impact. And I'd like to introduce the chair of this session, Professor Dominic Shellard, Vice Chancellor of De Montfort University.
Thank you very much, Dana. So, welcome to the first session, which is designed to give a sense of what's been achieved so far by the founding universities who've been working collectively to improve the lives of refugees and migrants in their communities, and particularly to change the narrative around those who have been displaced. That's a key part of our Action Charter. And it's also an opportunity to welcome new partners to the Universities Join Together network, to see how their work fits in, and to join the global conversation we're now having about how higher education can make a difference to those who most need it. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce this session's panel. To my left is Dr. Daya Abdu from Guildford College. She's a first-generation Palestinian, born and raised in Jordan. And Daya is an associate professor of English at Guildford College in Greensboro, North Carolina, where she's the founder and director of Every Campus a Refuge, which advocates for mobilizing campus resources to temporarily house refugees on campus grounds and to assist them in resettling in their local area. Thus far, Guildford has hosted on its campus and assisted in resettling 33 refugees from the Middle East and Africa, and more than half of those have been children. And also on my left is Mark Charlton, who's the head of public engagement at De Montfort University. Mark oversees a pioneering program of activity called DMU Local that encourages staff at our university to use their knowledge, skills and research to make a difference to numerous local communities. A key part of this project helps refugees in Leicester and overseas with DMU Global by teaching English, improving health and promoting cohesion. And around 250 students volunteer on the Rethinking Refugees project each year. And to my right, from the United Nations, is Antia Kristin Waterman, who's an Associate Public Information Officer at the UN, at the United Nations Academic Impact, and she works in the UN Department of Public Information. As I said, her work aligns institutions of higher education with the United Nations in supporting and contributing to the realization of United Nations goals and mandates, including the promotion and protection of human rights, access to education, sustainability, and conflict resolution. So before we engage directly with the panel, just a couple of contextual comments from me. So in January 2018, we met for the first time to discuss some of the very stark facts that are facing the world, particularly in relation to refugees and forced migration. We heard then how 67 million people have been forced to flee their homes due to war, natural disasters, hostility and ill treatment, but also because of race, sexuality, political or religious beliefs. Now new emerging challenges in the displacement of people worldwide due to conflict, famine and persecution have come to the fore recently in Venezuela, the Mediterranean region, and the ongoing Rohingya crisis. And of course, these new situations are emerging after the current world refugee situation has already been described as the worst ever. Now, in relation to our universities and to higher education, questions have been raised about higher education's response to the global refugee crisis and how our work sharing knowledge and research can make a difference. There's obviously been a great history of universities helping migrants in times of crisis, and that spirit of generosity continues till this day. But there are also now new calls for universities to demonstrate this by creating a better collective global response, working together, and also with governments, NGOs, and local agencies to help tackle problems at different levels. We're being asked as universities to make better use of collective resources, both financial and intellectual. Now, another emerging issue, in addition to Join Together, from the United Nations, is how those tasked with the integration of migrant communities do so within the framework, as we've heard, of the Sustainable Development Goals, which were announced in 2015 to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity for all. And as a result, universities are being encouraged to mobilize local efforts to seek ways to end all forms of poverty, to fight inequalities, and also to tackle a huge issue for us, climate change. And these, of course, are cited by the UN as many of the reasons for large displacements of populations, and universities and partners are now being asked to focus on the link between development, human rights, migration, and refugees. So this, in a nutshell, is our key responsibility today. With our global new reach, the Join Together network can demonstrate higher education's response, as well as share ideas and projects that really work. And the UN genuinely wants to listen to your ideas and solutions. So in 2018, in January, DMU took a lead in engaging the higher education sector worldwide to demonstrate how our work can promote safety, dignity and respect by undertaking local and international projects that meet the needs of those affected by displacement. We were joined then by 9 other universities from countries including Germany, China, the US and Cyprus. And this network has now grown enormously. We now have 38 universities across not just 4 continents, but 6 continents working closely together, sharing ideas and innovations. And we signed an action charter, which committed us to meet every 6 months, to reflect on what we've achieved, and to commit to undertaking another action at each university to help refugees and migrants. So I'd now like to invite Antia to say a little bit about how the United Nations academic impact can actually align with this Join Together movement. Antia, welcome.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here. And Dominic, you already pointed out a couple of similarities that we have between the network you have and the UN Academic Impact Network. So we have about 1,200 universities in 120 countries across the globe. And when we look at it geographically, even though we have such a wide reach, we see that there is an underrepresentation, especially in Africa, in Latin America, and also in Latin America, Arab states, and in the Arab states and Africa. So these are the areas where we actively reach out at the moment to find more members, because we really believe we need the representation in all regions to tackle the global issues that you pointed out: refugees, climate change, fighting poverty. When you look at the 2030 agenda, there are so many different topics to address that we really believe you need a strong global network to do so. Also, if you look at the diversity of the institutions, you also see that the different universities and higher education schools look at different disciplines. So obviously, you look at international relations, politics, public administration, but then we also have a lot of business schools who are in our network, showing you the wide variety as well in terms of different disciplines joining this network and tackling global issues. A common element that all these universities have is the commitment to the transformative power of education. So obviously this happens through teaching, through research, but then also the important part is through collaborative and knowledge sharing. So all these universities need to work together, share their knowledge, and tackle these problems together. Looking at the different activities, so from the 1,200 members, they are reporting to us activities that they're conducting throughout the year. And many of them actually also address the question that we are looking at today, which is how can universities support the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development? And I'm very excited to hear the different student projects that will be presented soon. And just to give you 3 examples of successful activities and projects that we had from universities from our network. So the first one that was successful was a university that engaged the local community and government. I think also, again, what our director Maher Nasser said earlier, when you look at the global goals, we need everyone to be involved. So in this regard, the university had students who were designing housing options for homeless people in India, in the state of Kerala. So they designed different housing opportunities, and then they worked with the government to actually realize these different designs, and also found local resources, local financing in that area. So that shows you how a university can actually make real impact on the ground when they work together with other people in the area, civil society, media, in this case, the local government as well. The second example is a university that basically used friendly international competition to create cooperation. So it was a university that wanted to look at the aspect on how to solve the water crisis. So everyone knows we have a problem having enough clean water in the future. So of course they were thinking, who can solve it better than students themselves? So they invited students from around the world to submit their ideas on how we can clean water. And they got submissions from Afghanistan, from Indonesia, literally from every country in the world. And also what was interesting, a lot of local solutions again. So for example, certain algae that can filter water, certain tree roots that can filter water that one person would not necessarily know about if they don't have these particular plants in their country. But it didn't stop there. So you had the competitive part to make sure you got the best ideas, but then they brought everyone together during a conference where they presented the different ideas, and people again could actually work together. So I think that shows you again the power of networks and bringing people together. And the last example that we also had addressed in the introduction already is universities emphasizing the foundational character of human rights for development. So we already heard about that before, but we had a university, for example, that invited a former child soldier to give a speech at the university, but also at the same time, that former child soldier was now a student at that university. And I think also for all of us, if we hear a story from someone, that we share, our daily lives with, that we see on a daily basis, that we have a lot in common, it really makes something very, if you think about human rights, which is a very abstract concept, it really makes it more tangible if you have a personal story, if you can find a certain personal connection to that particular concept. So I'm very much looking forward to the 3 presentations that are coming up, and I will be looking out for these different aspects if we find them in the student projects as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antje. So, Dr. Abdu, you do tremendous work at Guildford College. Can you just articulate, before we move on to the 3 presentations, how your university, your project is contributing to the Join Together campaign?
Right. Hi, everybody. So I think really at the heart of the program, Every Campus a Refuge, is a reimagining or an understanding of campus resources as useful and as practical, not just for our students, but for the folks in our community, whether they be refugees, immigrants, everybody, our small village that surrounds our campus. And so what we do is use our campus resources as the Vice Chancellor said, to provide temporary shelter to refugees coming into our area, and then support them in resettlement in Greensboro. There are other campuses that are now doing this all over the U.S. And so rather than simply thinking of our campus resources as resources for our students, we're reimagining what those campuses and what those resources and who those resources are for. So rather than sending our students out to volunteer, to do experiential learning, engaged learning, place-based learning, we're using our campus as a model for that experiential and place-based learning, and at the same time, providing access to resources to folks who otherwise would not have access to these resources. And up until now, we've really been thinking sort of in very practical ways about resources, right? Shelter, food, facilities, gyms, libraries, whatever it is. But we're also been thinking since the beginning of the Join Together campaign in January, how can we also support meaningful resettlement, right? So refugees go somewhere and they barely survive, right? So it's kind of just surviving. So we're now thinking about ways that we can use our campus resources to support folks thrive, right? How can they thrive and not simply survive? And so, as I said, we've been mostly providing shelter, food, whatever it is, and ESL instruction, but we've also now been thinking about the ways in which the refugees that we're hosting have particular passions or skills that our campus can support. So I want to give you a very small example. One of the most recent families that we hosted, the father was an artist, a calligraphist in Iraq. And so we thought, well, of course, we're a campus. We have an art department and we have art supplies. And you know what else we have? We have a gallery. And so this person produced enough work to put on an exhibit of his work on our campus, which was lovely. And then an exhibit space in Greensboro, a gallery, found out about his work, and now his work is exhibited there. And so even though this person is doing a 9-to-5 job to support his family, he's also able to do something that he loves, that makes life for him in Greensboro meaningful. And so we're beginning to think about our campus creatively, right? We have so many resources. How can we use those in ways that are not just meaningful for our students, but meaningful for everybody in our community, including refugees and migrants?
Fantastic, thank you. And Mark, how does your work, sort of as part of a global network, align with the work that Dr. Abdi is doing in Guildford College?
As part of our new network, as been mentioned earlier, we've started a new conversation. So we had a suite of around 15 projects that we were undertaking in Leicester, and we've been able to share that now with a number of universities who were founder members. We've all been stimulated by those ideas, and we've adopted some of the ideas already that were being done by our partners, and some of our projects have been taken into new communities overseas. And I think this is the real power of this network, that everybody's approaching this subject in a different way. And now that we're talking about it and creating a conversation, we're actually taking in some cases, very simple but effective ideas and then transporting them around the world and having acting locally but having a global impact with this work. So I think it's very exciting that we're here for the second summit of this kind, but we've actually achieved so much in the space of 6 months.
Okay, thank you. So in that spirit, we're now going to hear 3 case studies from 3 different universities, and we're going to invite them to present to us, and then we're going to have a discussion about the relative merits. All of the 3 are fantastic, by the way. And then in the spirit of true democracy, once you've asked your questions and the panel have interrogated them as well, we're going to ask you to vote which one should be adopted by the network. So without further ado, I'd like to invite the University of Pennsylvania to come and discuss PURE, which is Penn Undergraduates for Empowerment, a coalition that encourages the university to hire refugees as employees. So please give a very warm welcome to the University of Pennsylvania.
Okay, good morning everyone, and thank you so much to the illustrious panel up here. My name is Stephen Imburgia. I'm a rising senior at the University of Pennsylvania, and I study political science, economic policy, and journalism. And most importantly, I'm the Director of Communications for PURE, Penn Undergraduates for Refugee Empowerment. Philadelphia is a city of immigrants. Mayor Jim Kenney pledged to maintain the city's reputation as a haven for asylum seekers, migrants, and refugees when he announced on World Refugee Day last year that, quote, Philadelphia is going to be a sanctuary for people who need protection, end quote. Slightly more than 7,300 refugees arrived in the city between 2000 and 2015, according to data from the US Census Bureau. But as many of us who strive to ameliorate the lives of refugees know, the struggle never ends with resettlement. According to a data dive conducted by the Washington Post in August, and I quote, refugees' unemployment rates were 12%, notably higher than the overall Philadelphia rate of 8%. However, Philadelphia's refugee labor force participation rate, those actively looking for work and those currently working, was a very high 66%, end quote. Therefore, refugees and asylum seekers actively seek work, but because of barriers, whether they be cultural, linguistic, discriminatory, we too often see them trapped in jobs without any potential for upward mobility, becoming ensnared in this cycle of poverty and dependence on employment incommensurate with their skills. In Philadelphia, we've seen this story play out with drastic consequences. Many of the city's newest arrivals worked in refrigerated warehouses at a facility called Taylor Farms, earning $7.25 an hour, packaging foodstuffs that are sold at menial prices at local convenience stores. So migrants escape horrors at home, come to our city accomplished and ready to work, and we consider minimum wage, refrigerator-bound labor adequate job provision. And what happens next is they leave. We've seen an exodus of refugees from the city of Philadelphia in recent years. We claim to be this welcoming sanctuary city, but we're inadvertently pushing people away, forcing a damaging second round of migration. Not everyone leaves their initial place of resettlement, of course, but both options facing recent migrants are bleak. Either migrate again, a likely traumatic endeavor, or stay put and get stuck in poverty. Hamdi Ulukaya, the founder of Chobani, who just this year received an honorary degree from the University of Pennsylvania, once said, "The minute a refugee has a job, that's the minute he stops being a refugee." But at PURE, we believe it takes more than any job to, as our mission statement outlines, provide displaced persons with the tools needed to successfully assimilate into society and become active citizens. We believe it takes a job with 1, opportunity for social mobility, and just as crucial, if not more, 2, access to education. Access to education can prove an insurmountable barriers to newcomers. Many of the refugees we work with in Philadelphia were doctors, lawyers, engineers in their home countries, accomplished and educated people who are sometimes overqualified for the jobs in which they find themselves. But between the cost of standardized testing, linguistic barriers preventing students from enrolling in classes, demanding work schedules driven by low wages, a lack of US citizenship precluding hope for any scholarships, and tuition costs in the United States culminating in the tens and even hundreds of thousands of dollars, recertification and even chances for higher education for the next generation can be unattainable. The problem, therefore, was clear. Refugees resettling to Philadelphia find themselves trapped in low-paying jobs with poor conditions and little opportunity to advance. Luckily, we at Pure were positioned to make a change. After all, Pure is affiliated with an economic powerhouse and purported rectifier of social inequality, the University of Pennsylvania. Penn is the largest employer in the city of Philadelphia and the second largest employer in the entire state of Pennsylvania, after Walmart, fun fact. There's no better organization, therefore, to provide Philadelphia's refugees with good-paying jobs than our very university. Even more consequential than the provision of jobs, many universities offer tuition breaks to both employees and their families. At Penn, tuition benefit for faculty and staff covers 100% of the tuition and fees for up to 2 course units per term, tuition that exceeds $53,000. For faculty members' children, 75% of Penn's tuition is covered, as well as almost every other accredited bachelor's and associate's degrees program in the country. If people can pay for school, they can go to school, whether for recertification in their field or something entirely new. And when the children of refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers use university-granted tuition benefits, they give their families a true shot at putting down roots in their new homes and progressing socioeconomically. So at least in theory, our solution was simple: convince the University of Pennsylvania to hire refugees. Stephen Damianos, our organization's president, spearheaded an initiative last year to do just that. Pure has taken steps toward realizing this goal by forming the Refugee Employment Task Force, a coalition of student groups and university actors who will work together to lobby the administration to hire refugees. Currently, the coalition consists of Pure, ourselves, the United Minorities Council, the Undergraduate Assembly, Hillel, Penn Global, and the Muslim Student Association, which together comprise hundreds of students on our campus. Unfortunately, this problem is hardly unique to Philadelphia. All around the world, refugees struggle to find jobs, or they find jobs that leave them overworked and underpaid. But the universality of the problem also indicates a replicability of our solution. Creating a task force is something that can be done at every one of our partner universities. We each have the ability to put pressure on our universities to hire refugees, and in that sense, we all have the power to contribute meaningfully to a resolution. Just think about the impact that we would have together. If just 25 of our partner schools hired just 10 refugees each, so many people would benefit. Not only would new employees receive sustainable jobs, their spouses and children would be granted easier access to higher education, with all the opportunity it implies and promise it inspires. Such an initiative taking place all over the world would likely garner massive and global press, which in turn might encourage other universities to take this on. We like to think that our proposal could be the start of a movement, the start of a norm whereby universities are expected to hire refugees from their community. Institutions of higher learning are uniquely equipped to solve some of the world's most pressing problems, whether it be climate change, income inequality, or in our case, the expansion of opportunities for those seeking refuge in our countries. With so many facets to the crisis and so many political obstacles that attempt to hamper our drive for openness and justice, refugee empowerment may seem an insurmountable task. But it's one that we can accomplish if we, in the words of the campaign, join together. Thank you all so much.
Stephen, if you could just kindly remain there. What we'll do now is we've got time for 3 questions or comments on this magnificent proposal based in a sanctuary city of Philadelphia, quality jobs for refugees. And Stephen's proposal is aiming to start a movement to persuade universities to hire refugees. And he's come up with the proposition that if 25 of the partner organizations in our network were to do that, that would be a very significant achievement and create real momentum. So this is your opportunity. Please don't be shy. Raise your hand if you'd like to ask Stephen a question or make a comment on his proposal. Sir, there.
George Anthony from Pathways to Peace and the Global Leadership Institute at Monday Prep. First of all, I want to say thank you for your humanity and for basically giving us a model to work with. My question is, this is really a powerful statement. Have you seen a domino effect, let's say, in the lives of those involved? Because this is really talking about student engagement. So the students who are involved in this project, have you seen their lives sort of immersed as a result of this involvement? And also, have any of the refugees also talked about how this program has immersed their lives as well? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the most tangible effects that we've seen at Pure has been our online tutoring that we do. We do ESL tutoring, and that has really exploded on our campus. After we created this Refugee Employment Task Force, even more than the results that we've seen trying to lobby the administration to hire refugees, which of course there's a lot of bureaucratic and internal political barriers to that, we've seen so many students show interest in tutoring refugees in Philadelphia and teaching them English, because as I mentioned in my speech, so much of the barriers that refugees in Philadelphia face are linguistic. So I think that has been one of my favorite things about being part of Pure, and I think many of our general body members would say the same. And we even have students that are part of Hillel, the Undergraduate Assembly, the United Minorities Council, that aren't even members of our organization that are reaching out to us to tutor online. So,
thank you very much.
Yes,
okay.
absolutely.
Any students? Yeah, right over there. It doesn't matter if you're not a student.
Hello, no, I'm not a student. Sorry, I'm a member of staff. Louise O'Barra from DMU. I really like your presentation and your passion, and I like the idea. Many moons ago, I used to work with asylum seekers and refugees, and I just wondered if you thought about how you'd even get them to apply for the job in the first place, because in my experience, it was the lack of confidence to even apply to the process. I just wondered if you thought of that in the campaign and how you go about addressing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something we've been thinking long and hard about, because even if the political will, if you will exists on behalf of the University of Pennsylvania, like you said, another barrier is just that cultural, linguistic, even discriminatory barrier that many refugees have gone through so much strife that they don't want applying for a job to be another struggle to add to the list. So I know our president, Stephen Damianos, has made this a major initiative of his, and in the tutoring that we do and working with HAIS, I believe is the acronym, H-A-I-S, which is the Hebrew, excuse me, I forget the acronym, but it's a refugee resettlement agency in Philadelphia. They have spearheaded an initiative to help refugees apply for jobs, which is something that we're going to be on board with come the fall semester. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you at this time, but I'd be happy to speak to you more about that come the fall. So thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. And the last comment must go to a student. So who's going to be brave enough to be the first student contributor to our conference? Sure.
Oh, is this working? Okay. Hi, my name is Charlotte Burnett. I'm from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And I just wanted to ask, particularly for asylees and undocumented persons, what kind of assistance do you provide for them, and how do you deal and negotiate that in this current climate? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's been one of the toughest things, and I'm actually really proud of our university administration for coming out in such strong support of undocumented students, especially after all of the DACA upheaval that's been going on in the American administration. Again, our partner, which is HAIS, H-A-I-S, they have been working even with undocumented asylees and refugees and asylum seekers to try to find jobs that they can receive, even if scholarships are off the table. Oftentimes scholarships in the United States are on the table for their children. So that's something that we've been very actively involved in, and we do SAT tutoring as well as linguistic and ESL tutoring with the children of many undocumented immigrants. So I think that is how we've been cognizing it, but I'm actually pretty proud of the university administration for their stance on that.
Thank you. So please show your appreciation for Stephen's proposal. Thank you. So could I now invite our second case study, which is from Aristotle University in Greece. And they're going to describe how their work provides psychological support for migrant communities and access to healthcare and to legal advice. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody. I'm pretty sure you know the relation we have with refugees and migrants the last years in Greece. And you probably heard the name of our university, Aristotle. I hope it's a familiar name to many of you. So we're trying to use his wisdom in different areas. What I'm going to present is very briefly one of the programs that we are running in Aristotle University concerning the refugees, and then I'm going to stress 2 points coming from experiences from the past that helped us throughout this program. Now, the title of the program is sucre, the French word for, it's just initials for sugar, but it's not such a sweet issue. It's the acronym for Supporting University Community Pathways for Refugees, Migrants. SICRU focuses on the response of the universities to the academic needs of refugees and migrant students and scholars, and to the formation of good practices guidelines through the development of training modules addressed to voluntary sector working in the field with a specific population. So we're not working with the specific population directly, but indirectly. Specifically, the project focuses on the processes required for the proper integration of refugees and migrants, students and scholars, as I said, in higher education, as well as on their academic support after their acceptance or entrance in the university. In addition, it focuses on the psychosocial integration and support and their proper information on legal and health issues. And this is, the last one is very important, and I will comment some more on that. This program is, the SICRU project is funded as a 2-year Erasmus Plus strategic partnership program in the field of higher education, and it is carried out by Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, which is the project coordinator, and 2 other European universities, the Vrije University in Amsterdam, Netherlands, and the University of Cologne in Germany. The project employs field and desk research methodologies and focuses on the response of universities to the needs of migrants as scholars and students. Briefly, I will go now to the 2 points that I think are very important, and I will discuss how we use them in designing our project. First of all, I should mention that although European countries have common concerns in meeting refugees' needs, these needs are differentiated from country to country. I mean, this is more than evident to all of us here. It is expected that Northern European countries will receive refugees willing to build a new life. Whereas other countries, such as Greece, they have to face urgent and transient needs. Refugees are not willing to stay. It's, an area that they go through. This knowledge led us to the organization of our project. This is how we organized and shared the work packages among us. Germany and the Netherlands are working on issues regarding the acceptance of people in the universities. In Greece, we are working mainly with providing methods for psychosocial support by training the students, and also we are designing e-learning courses which have to do with legal and health needs of the migrants. This is very important, and this is based, this second point, past experience that we're basing our design is that we did have at the university experience with another kind of migrants in the late 80s, early 90s, where very large numbers of people of initially Greek origin, but not really, would move to Greece from the former Soviet Union countries. So back then, the first thing that we were doing was to offer psychosocial support to these people, mainly psychological support. But we very soon realized that very few of them would respond to our programs, and we also realized that they had more practical needs. So we went into making a needs survey using people who were speaking Greece from that population, enabling them to have this community capability and self-help attitude. So through them, as our very good speaker, Bora, the refugee director that spoke earlier, he stressed the importance of having research done in order to find out what the real needs are and not just imagine from the side of our scientific department. So the point I'm trying to make is that this is a program that it is differentiated according to the needs of the refugees that we're addressing, and also it combines the different strengths that different European countries will have to bring into that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Nadine. You've reminded me yet again of the catastrophe of Brexit, because you are running a 2-year Erasmus Plus project with collaborators in Germany and the Netherlands, and regrettably, if we leave next year on the 29th of March, we won't be able to embark on Erasmus Plus projects. But folks, there's still time to lobby if you're young UK students for a second referendum, so there we go. But this is a very interesting project, isn't it? And it emphasizes the importance of having a very proper research base to be able to tackle some of the issues in relation to the assimilation of asylum seekers, refugees and migrants, providing proper information to them in relation to the spheres of health and legal contexts. So, over to you guys. 3 opportunities for 3 questions, 3 comments. Anything you'd like to know a little bit more about this project? Anything you'd like to tease out? Who would like to kick off? Or we can come back on me on Brexit if you want to. Okay. Yes, please. Thank you. Just put your hand up, so I think they need to see you in the box. There we go. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
You have to push the button. Oh,
that's it. There we go.
Okay.
You're ready.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Alamayo. I go to the University of Virginia, and I'm just curious. I know you mentioned in the 80s, the initial experience with migrants coming from the former Soviet states. Maybe it was a bit. I'm not sure. I'm asking first if it was easier in terms of addressing their needs. And I'm just wondering, what is the difference between or what are the obvious needs that are now that there are different migrants that are coming from the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa? What are the different and very obvious needs that you guys are noticing from the start?
Well, I would say there are both a lot of differences, but also many similarities. The major difference is coming from the fact that at this point of time, people are coming through wars or in order to avoid wars or extreme poverty, and they come through very dangerous pathways. There is a very high rate, a death toll of people trying to reach the regions of Greece through mainly Turkey. People in the 80s and 90s, they had both economic reasons for migration, but mainly political and, if you like, ethnic reasons. They wanted to come back to their origins of country. On the other hand, there were many similarities. They would have the same practical problems as people have now, very urgent. They didn't know how to use legal services or central services or health services, and we would offer them psychological support first, which was not the first thing that they actually needed. So very soon we realized that we have to go into the side of the people who we are offering the help in order to offer the appropriate help. And this is very similar, regardless of the reason they're migrating.
Thank you. Put your hand up like this so I can see you if you'd like to question. Yeah, right over there. Thank you.
Hello, Liz Stokes from De Montfort University. I am a psychology student, and I really like how you work with the refugees to find out what their needs are on an individual basis. Do you track these needs throughout their time with you? Because obviously they're with you for a number of years. They've been through horrendous time, and as a psychology student, I know PTSD, that can be a delayed onset. So do you monitor their psychosocial state throughout their time with you?
Well, I see what you're saying. Of course, they may have delayed. Let me put it the other way. We're not our first desire is our first wish is not to tackle psychopathological issues, but to tackle the very practical needs they have, and then we're training people in order to listen to them. We don't work with refugees, we work with the people from the organizations, so they need who offer volunteers or workers in different NGOs and other organizations. And it's very important for them to know not to go there with a ready agenda on what they have to search for. They have to have ways of finding what the people really need for.
Thank you very much. There were a couple of other hands. Yeah, right at the back.
Hi, I was just wondering, obviously you say that some of the refugees don't want that support. I was just wondering if you have like an advocate from that refugee community that may be at the university to kind of help encourage others to join and get the support that you are offering.
Just say who you are.
I'm Christy, I'm one of the De Montfort University students.
Could you repeat them? I'm not sure I understood your question. Your question is whether other universities should...
No, is there an advocate in your university that was previously a refugee that could help encourage other refugees to get the support that they had, maybe?
This is the new, all this new wave of refugees. We don't have, of this part, we don't have refugees, but we do have a very large population coming from the same countries from the time of peace. For example, there is a very strong Syrian community in Thessaloniki, which is very much involved with the new refugees. Of course, they're in a very different situation, but yes, we do have people who have some past experiences. But this wave of refugees for the past 5 years in Greece, still we have no experience. We don't have a generation staying there. Remember, Greece is just the road to the northern European countries or North America. Actually.
So thank you very much. Another fascinating project. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you for giving me.
Okay, and on to our final presentation. This is from the University of Jaén in Spain, and they'll be describing their work in supporting refugees who have fled their home countries, yet are still at risk in new communities due to ethnicity, religion, and sexual orientation.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Sebastian Bruque, coming from the University of Jaén in Spain. Dear Vice Chancellor Shellard and United Nations authorities, dear colleagues, dear students, I would like to thank you for these opportunities you gave us to explain this initiative with regards to refugee students at double risk. During the last 3 years at the University of Jaén, a medium-sized public university in southern Spain, we have developed a project to identify and help refugees who belong to specially persecuted populations. These students, normally young women or men, accumulate years of suffering because of a twofold cause. Firstly, because they experienced the war or conflict as young refugees, many times directly affected by the combats and destruction because of the war, or even because they were called up for duty in the army or were forced to join militias. And secondly, but even more importantly, because they belong to a particularly persecuted group for reasons related to their race, ethnic adscription, gender preference, sexual orientation, or religious belief. Once we decided to focus on this so-called refugees at double risk program, we faced several challenges and went through several stages that I will describe now. Stage 1, self-identification. In a context of war, persecution, insecurity, and risk applicable to general dislocated populations, self-identification is the triggering factor without which the assistance procedure cannot be initiated. We had to analyze potential cases based on self-identification, normally in the country of origin, but also in third intermediate countries, in which the refugees were looking for temporary asylum. In order to facilitate self-identification, we had to closely work with NGOs, media correspondents, and associations working on the ground, and with their branches in Spain. The role of social networks promoted by these same persecuted groups themselves was also crucial. Self-identification is a critical phase and had to be promoted both with lots of patience and also through thorough work to avoid fake cases and to keep anonymity for targeted students. Self-identification requires in itself a certain degree of courage by refugee students, but is absolutely necessary in order to step in the following phases. Stage 2, screening. After the self-identification phase, a screening or selection stage commenced. Selection was carried out in close cooperation with other institutions, mostly NGOs working on the ground or in third searching countries. In our target countries, mostly Syria and Yemen, we worked with international NGOs to confirm selection during the student stays in Turkey and Lebanon. Triangulation of the information obtained in the self-identification stage was key for case screening. In many cases, what we called mirror organizations in Spain were of great utility to help us to select high preferential cases and the selection committee to make a final decision. Stage 3, official arrangements and travel permits. This is one of the toughest parts of the whole process since national immigration authorities are not used, and maybe they are not used even less, in Spain to directly working with universities, refugee students and NGOs at the same time. The cooperative tandem made up by the university, NGOs working locally and on the ground, and national immigration authorities abroad was key for a successful outcome. We must say that our consular authorities in this case, in Ankara, Beirut, and Dubai, cooperated very effectively with us. In this stage, we went through very complex situations, sometimes because some of the students had incomplete or expired documentation, and very oftenly, the links with families and home institutions were broken because of the war. Stage 4, integration. Once the students arrived in European soil, the academic and personal integration stage started. To ease academic and social integration, we put into place a grant program, a scholarship program for refugee students by which we were able to cover full costs of living, including accommodation, tuition fees, meals, and language courses. Psychological counseling and social support by peer students was also arranged. Selected students were then directed to a full bachelor or master degree at our university, depending on their academic background and preferences. In some cases, a full year tuition in Spanish language was developed to facilitate access to full bachelor or master courses. Academic progress was also assessed every 6 months in order to adjust the students' academic schedule. And stage 5, awareness raising. Oftentimes, working and helping refugees provokes mistrust and fear in the host society. Careful communication and raising awareness are vital elements in this stage. We work together with some media correspondents at the home countries. And the same media helped us to explain the individual stories so that we can explain refugee conditions and lives before they arrived in safe land. We also had to rely on traditional and social media to illustrate why these types of actions for refugee students should be carried out by universities in countries like Spain. We also strive as well to communicate how the effort invested in these students will ultimately pay off in our societies in the form of future professionals who will work in Spain or in other countries and who will improve living conditions in their home countries. Currently, in 2018, we can say that we were successful in accomplishing the full procedure for a number of refugee students from Syria and Yemen belonging to especially persecuted populations. The figure will increase this year by adding 3 additional students also from conflict areas in Western Africa. The path has been long and sometimes painful, but now we can say that at least in some cases, we were able to change lives for the better and hopefully for good. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Sebastian. So can I ask the panel actually to kick off with some observations or questions on this particular proposition? Mark.
Hi, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Did you have any challenges encouraging your entire university to buy into this idea?
Yeah, sure. Well, we are coming from a medium-sized university in southern Spain, so we are located in a very traditional area. So we have to convince people, firstly inside the organization, that we are helping students who are belonging to specially persecuted populations, that sometimes they have some prejudices as well inside these local small areas inside Spain. So that was the first, maybe the most important, one of the most important tasks, to convince inside the organization that we are doing a job that can be relevant for the university in the future, because they are going to be part of the university community in the future as well.
Thank you. Let me open it up. Who would like to ask a question or have an observation? Yes, please.
And it on?
There it is, it's on now.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Ellen. I'm from Amsterdam University College. Thank you so much for sharing your initiative. I'm particularly interested in how you talked about you managed to change the media perception of refugees, which I think is a fundamental component of the perceived crisis, in that most of the time refugees are depicted as this one threatening, homogeneous group. And I was particularly interested, do you also... You said we kind of discuss with media outlets and we negotiate with them to see if we can change that perception. Do you also enable a space for the individual voices of refugees themselves to be shared in media outlets, or does it always go through a method of representation on your behalf?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So in some cases, we relied on media, because in the self-identification phase, media working in Turkey in this case were key in order to find out, in order to localize, in order to identify these cases that were students, university students belonging to persecuted populations in their home institutions. So we had a very good cooperation with some media, and from the very beginning, and we exchanged information from the very beginning from the correspondents, war correspondents, for example, in Turkey and in Syria, mostly in Turkey, so that we could exchange this information and try to find an equilibrium, a trade-off between the safety of the students themselves, because they were in a very delicate situation there, and all the information we could deploy there could be used to maybe to attack them or to put them in a very delicate situation. So it was a very, maybe the worst and the most complicated thing was dealing with this mass media, communicate with them, and the whole communication went through the university and the mass media. We talked to the students, do you want to provide your details, your contact details to other media? And they confirmed that they didn't want. So I think that's the best option were to maintain all the flow under control through the university and directly with the media.
Thank you very much. Time for one last observation. Straight in front of me. It's on.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Emily Wilmer from Temple University. I noticed that your initiative has a lot of steps even before the refugees enter into the country. As a university student, what can I do to support this initiative from a local level?
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting stage as well. So, well, we tried to get involved some students at the university so that they were helping international refugees. Taking into account that we are working with refugees that are at the beginning they are outside, they are abroad. They are in Turkey, they are in Syria, or they are in Yemen or in Dubai. So from the very beginning, we tried to train a group of students here so that we were prepared to help the students, the incoming students, when they arrive finally in Spain, in order to provide them with support regarding accommodation, regarding language courses, regarding integration, and above all, psychological counseling by peers, which is very important. So we had a very nice experience with the psychology department. So master students in psychological departments were trained before the arrival of refugee students so that they could provide finally support for these newcomers as refugees at the University of Jaén. The advantage was that we had several months in advance to prepare a group of students there at the university and to train them so that they have enough time to learn, to understand their situation, to understand their personal stories behind that, and to provide a very good support once they are at the university now.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Sebastian. Thank you. Okay, we're coming to the business part of the session now. Let me remind you what we're asking you to do. So these are obviously all excellent projects, and they will continue irrespective of what we decide now. But we're looking to choose one of those three to spread across the whole of the network of 38 universities to give them a particular profile and to see whether the other universities as part of the network are willing to sort of take up these ideas. So we're encouraging you to vote for your favorite project. You've only got one vote. Those of you near a desk will see 3 buttons: yes, no, and abstain. Voting is very simple. We just want you to vote yes for the project you support. You don't need to vote no or abstain. And for any of you who are up there who don't have a voting button, you just can raise your hand in support of the project that you want to identify, and our team at the front will count and register your vote. And I think because I'm sitting next to a representative from the United Nations Academic Impact Network, I think we ought to make it a criteria that if you want to belong to the Join Together network, you have to join the United Nations Academic Impact Network. And Oren read the names out at the beginning, and I don't think everybody was a member, so from now on you'll need to be. And we can give you details about how to apply. Okay, so let's begin the voting process now. Just one vote. For those voting for the University of Pennsylvania, vote yes now. And is anyone up there raising their hand? Okay. Let's move on now to those who wish to vote for Aristotle University, Greece. Thank you very much. And those of you who wish to vote for the University of Jaén in Spain, please vote. No. Sorry, right, it's now closed. Good. Mustn't mix up the votes. So if you want to vote for the University of Jaén, Spain, please vote now. Thank you very much indeed. So just while we're waiting to tally up the votes, and Laura will bring us the result, I just want any final observations from the panel members on what they've heard this morning. Dr. Abdu.
I want to say that I'm really impressed with the different ways in which campuses are bringing their particular strengths to bear. And so I think for the Pure project, I think thinking about the power that a state university has, especially here in the US, and its ability to hire refugees, I think pushing that and pressing on that particular powerful resource is really impressive. And then thinking of Greece and Spain, who are on the front line of receiving refugees in dire need of psycho-social, cultural, but practical assistance at the moment of entry. So I'm really just find it wonderful that campuses are leveraging their resources in ways very useful and practical for the different stages that refugees are finding themselves in their journey.
Thank you. And a final word from Anya, please.
The same here. I'm very impressed how holistic all these approaches were. So you're not looking at the individual, but you're looking at their families. You do not only look at their physical need, but also the psychological aspect. And you're also bringing in other players in your community. So it's a very local approach, but then also keeping in mind how can we copy this idea around the world. So all boxes are ticked from our end as well.
Thank you very much. And the project that you have chosen is from the University of Pennsylvania. So we will make sure that we work closely with you to disseminate this across the whole of the partner network. Thank you very much, Stephen. And over to Dana, please.
Thank you all very much for your participation in this session. Session 1 is now closed, and the next session will begin in 5 minutes at 11:45. Thank you.